Hey, creative nonfiction writers, memoirists, personal essay writers, and personal story writers on Medium. I want to share with you today how you can create a climax moment in your stories. So your stories don't just read like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. That's just a sequence of events. And unless you have that climax moment in there, it just starts to read like blah, 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 blah. You know, you're not building toward a climax. That's what a story does. It builds to a climax. And so today I want to share with you how you can build to that climax moment. I think everybody knows what a climax is. It's where you, as the narrator in a creative nonfiction or memoir story, come to a turning point moment in the event that you're writing about where things are going to get better or things are going to get worse based on how you confront the conflict that you're facing. So if you want to write a story with a climax, the most important thing is to first identify your conflict because the conflict and the climax are interrelated. Another thing I try to find too is called an inciting incident. That just means there's some kind of event that's happening at the beginning of your story that turns the world of you as the narrator upside down. And the rest of the story is really you trying to turn your world right side up. And the climax is that moment where you're taking that decisive action against the climax and that inciting incident to turn your world back right side up. I know I dropped some new terms on you there. So before we keep going, let's just do a quick review on what is a climax and what is an inciting incident in a story. Sometimes it's really easy to find the climax in a story. I'm reading a memoir right now by Sean Smucker. It's called How to Use a Runaway Truck Ramp. And at one part of the story, he's driving down Tatum Pass at about 8,000 feet elevation, and the brakes go out on his recreational vehicle. His wife and 4 kids are in there. So that's obviously a climax moment. And if you're writing that scene, you're definitely going to zero in on that moment. It's like the moment where things are going to get better or things are going to get worse. And Sean, as the driver, has to take some kind of decisive action to try to save his family from, going over this huge cliff and to their death. Sometimes I've noticed it's not really easy to find that climax moment in a story. And so sometimes you have to think really carefully about where's that moment where your story is building and building where things get better or worse. I know I'm writing a story right now for my memoir, and it's about taking my son to a miniature golf course. It was a glow-in-the-dark miniature golf course, and his senses were very overstimulated. So at the very beginning, the inciting incident is just the fluorescent blacklit murals that were overstimulating his senses. And then, as I was writing it, it was kind of hard to find the climax moment. The rising action was him being overstimulated, him running off, just describing kind of his reaction from his body to this neon environment. And then, of course, I didn't do a good job of giving him a sensory break, but that really wasn't the climax. The more I kind of wrote it, and I really wasn't sure what the climax was, I realized by thinking carefully about this event that the climax really was he was using the obstacles on the course to get the sensory input he needed to help regulate his body. So the climax was something that I probably didn't even really see until I was thinking about it later and writing about it. So if you want to write good stories that have a climax, a lot of times it just takes a lot more thinking. So it's not just this happened and then this happened and this happened. Those aren't really, to me, very appealing stories to read. They just kind of feel like blah, 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 blah. So sometimes it takes a lot of thinking to really get that climax story and to really understand what you actually experienced in your story. So what I'm saying here is try to visually outline your story before you begin writing. Try to really see maybe what's my inciting incident, that event that turns my world as a narrator upside down. What's the rising action? What are those smaller events that lead towards my climax? Those events are really important so that it just doesn't get to the climax real fast and try to really know where is or what is my climax? Where is this story going? If you can kind of know that moment, it can just make your story so much better. And then what I try to do in my stories is really stretch out that climax moment, really try to show, not tell, give a lot of details, because that's the key moment of your story. That's the moment where you as the narrator are facing and confronting and taking decisive action against this conflict and inciting incident that you are experiencing in your story. So don't just kind of rush through the climax. Let me give a quick example of a climax so you can see what I mean by stretching out with lots of show not tell details and descriptions, so you can see how helpful and important it is for the reader to be able to see this moment of you taking decisive action, or in this case it's my son taking decisive action. This is from the story I mentioned about taking my son to a glow-in-the-dark miniature golf course, and this is him taking decisive action. The final 8 holes are anticlimactic, sort of. Dominic leaps off a treasure chest on one hole and tries pulling a sword with his friend Zeppelin on the next hole. And it occurs to me he may be getting sensory input from the obstacles on the course to regulate his body. The main thing about this story is that he was overstimulated. He was not able to control his body. So here is him taking this decisive action to regulate or control his body. On the next hole, he climbs up an 8-foot tower using the tiered edges for sensory input. And I would say he's using the sensory input from the obstacles on the course to regulate his body. Amazing. I don't know if he knows it, but I see a correlation between his calm body and the sensory input he's getting from the objects on the miniature golf course. So there you have an example of a stretched out climax moment, and hopefully what you're taking away from this video is the importance of visually outlining your story before you begin writing. Really know what your inciting incident is, know what your conflict is, and really be clear on your climax. You can also be clear on those little smaller moments, the rising action that lead to the climax. But the climax is the most important thing. You really want to be clear on what was the decisive action that you took. What was the moment where things were going to get better or worse? What was the thing you're struggling with, And then stretch it out. Don't just kind of have it be a little blip. That's not going to leave much of an impact at all on a reader. All right, everybody, happy writing, and don't forget to subscribe to receive notifications if you've never subscribed to my channel. And again, it's all about the informal art of online writing. I try to take what I've learned from offline writing and apply it to online writing. In this case, you can see how a climax is a part of, books and scenes in books, and it can also be a huge part of an online story that you build to. Maybe the story is a little shorter and condensed, but it still does have that climax moment. Peace out, everybody, and happy writing.